Here, those who do tours here at the State House, my voice kind of carries, so I need to keep it down a little bit so I'm not interfering with anyone else doing it. But let me just give you a quick, this, by the way, we're close to where the cornerstone is from the State House. And the cornerstone was laid July 4th, 1795. So you want to get a little context of where this began. Now it's kind of interesting because July 4th, of course, is the day of the Declaration of Independence was ratified. It was initially signed on July 2nd, but then officially ratified on July 4th. And when this was the case, a man by the name of Samuel Adams stood on the little cornerstone here and gave one of his typical speeches, which lasted about 1 minute and 20 seconds. He was not an orator, but he was a writer. But he proclaimed right here that may this State House always house individuals that espouse the natural rights of the colonists, and may they be defended ardently right here. Now, that's a quick summary of it. Why would he say natural rights? I want to show you that. That phrase was very common at the time our nation was founded. In fact, in the preamble to the state constitution of Massachusetts, which was the second constitution, I want to keep that theme so you understand why we had the first constitution was voted down by the people in 1779 by a 6-1 margin. So the people did not like the first constitution in the state now, this is during the American Revolution, that was put forward. The second one resoundingly passed. There's a real reason why. Now, one of the reasons why is that the first Constitution did not mention natural rights. Now, let me just read you the first paragraph of the state constitution. It says this: the end of the institution, maintenance, and administration of government is to secure the existence of the body politic, to protect it, to furnish the individuals who compose it with the power of enjoying in safety and tranquility their natural rights. Now, when you hear natural rights today, you might be able to think, if we impose today's meanings on phrases, which is called equivocation. In logic, it's a fallacy to give a phrase a different meaning than it originally had and was originally used. So natural rights today is called rights that you get from nature. So natural is the cause of those rights. That's not at all what Sam Adams was talking about. He meant the rights that you were given by God in your nature. That if someone tried to take those rights away, they would have to separate you from your own nature. For all human nature. In fact, the origin was known to be right at creation. So that when someone would say, where did you get your rights? Well, I got them from God. How do you know that? Because I was created. I was created by a creator. Now we know that's in the Declaration of Independence, isn't it? We're endowed by our creator with certain unalienable rights. Now the word unalienable rights was also a clarification of natural rights, because it meant it came from God. Unalienable means you can't alienate those rights from your nature and still remain a human being. You can't do it. And people can steal it for a time, as they would say. A government can steal it. An emperor, a dictator can take away your life, but they can take away your life, but they've never been able to take away your right to life. You see? Yeah. Because you die with that right. It may be stolen temporarily, but that's what it was. So from the creator. So the interesting thing is natural rights come from the creator. That's what the phrase meant in the Declaration of Independence. Now here's an interesting quote. 1837, John Quincy Adams. We all know who John Quincy Adams was. He was the son of John Adams, the second president. There's only two father-son presidents.
Adams
and Bush. Now listen carefully. Here's John Quincy Adams. It's July 4th, 1837. He is giving the oration on the Declaration of Independence, the celebration of that, in Newburyport, not far from here, up in the northeast corner of Massachusetts. Now, here's what he's doing. This is what he says. Because I chose this quote for today, because we're having Christmas at the State House. He said, "Why is it that next to the birthday of the Savior of the world, your most joyous and most venerated festival returns on July 4th? Interesting. Is it not that in the chain of human events, the birthday of the nation is indissolubly linked with the birthday of the Savior?" Now, you learned this in school, right? That this is what the Savior is. That it forms a leading event in the progress of the gospel dispensation. Is it not that the Declaration of Independence first organized the social compact on the foundation of the Redeemer's mission on earth? You all know that, right? Say that it laid the cornerstone of human government on the first precepts of Christianity and gave to the world the first irrevocable pledge of the fulfillment of the prophecies announced directly by heaven for the birth of the Savior, predicted by the greatest of the Hebrew prophets 600 years before. Who's the prophet 600 years before? We always quote Isaiah. So here's John Quincy Adams in the middle of his oration at a picnic ground, giving an oration commemorating the Declaration of Independence, and he indissolubly links the independence of America with the birthday of Jesus. That's amazing. Today we would go, what? How do you do that? And he said it's indissolubly linked. What does that mean? You can't separate the two. Because the Redeemers, if it had not been for Christmas, there would have been no independence in America. Now, independence was declared on July 4th, but it took 70 years to begin to be realized. Now, understand this. When you live in a nation that declares a truth that's ahead of where the people are living, you live in a blessed nation. Someone say to me, I'm in debates all the time, radio, and all that, they say, how could America have any godly heritage if there was slavery? Well, slavery was not godly. We know that. That was not part of God's plan. Why is that the case? Because the truth that the nation was founded on, the nation had not caught up to the truth, because the truth is eternal. Massachusetts is blessed to have this one. However, when this one was first offered to Massachusetts, the citizens rejected the statue. Said they did not want the statue of Washington here. It was not anything to do with George Washington. Can anybody figure that out? This is the average citizen in Massachusetts, early 1800s. Why, Washington's passed away, why would they not want this statue of Washington in the State House?
He looks like a Roman.
He has on a Roman robe. A Roman robe. Now, look, you would have to recognize the average citizen today would know this too, right? No, the reason the Roman toga was not something they wanted is because the average citizen understood the difference between common law and Roman law. Roman law is the law of permit. In other words, the government is sovereign and you can't do anything without permission of the government. We call it permit law. For instance, the Roman government would allow the Jews, when they lived at the time of Jesus, when he came, they would allow them to build a deck on the back of their house by permit of the state. Even though they quote, owned their land, they didn't own their land because they paid property taxes, which is a lien on the land based on rent to the civil government. So you didn't have, Roman law was permit law. Roman law was a permission from the civil government. See, common law meant, no, you were free, and the only power government has was what you ceded to it. Do you see the difference? One is express powers, the other is permit powers. Government has all power, gives you some. So you say, oh, thank you for my liberty, but it's privileges, not rights, because what the government gives, the government takes away. So if rights are government granted, they can be government taken. So here, all that to say, and I could go in a lot more detail of this, but here's the point. All that to say, the average citizen in Massachusetts knew, whoa, he's got the wrong robe on. Because Washington would never have ever condoned Roman law in any state of the Union. Follow me? In fact, what did he do? It was the perversion of original English constitutional law to a Roman version that we fought the American Revolution against. See, the American Revolution was fought because government does not have the sovereign power to tax you whenever it wants to. The government does not have the sovereign power to own your land or to give you permission to go on its roads. You know, that started a whole battle when a British officer came and said, this is the King's Highway. And you know what the response of the citizens were? No, it's the King of King's Highway. You got it wrong, okay? Because this is common law. This is common allodial property. This is not feudal property. See, feudal property is when you rent from the government. The king owns all the land, and you are a feud. Look it up. The word feud, F-E-U-D, means you are an individual who is leasing something from the sovereign. Whereas a allodial front, you own it totally outright.
Right.
And because there were no property taxes in the Bible, there was no property taxes in America. No taxes on income, only God can tithe a proportion, therefore there were no taxes. Ben Franklin put it this way: the day the government actually taxes the way God asks for a tithe, you have tyranny. Ben Franklin.
Right.
So you realize this is how common it was. Well, you know, I can stay here a long time. We can't do it, so let's go on. I want to just point out very quickly, this is the first set of murals ever put in the State House. Remember, it was completed in 1798, so this is 1802. These are put in at this section. The State House has been expanded. Over 100 years later, it was expanded again. Now, this is to tell you the story of the American Revolution. That these individuals put up on this wall led the American Revolution. They led Massachusetts and they led the Revolution. And we have names for them. Of course, they have names, but we recognize it. Now, very quickly, I'm starting here. You have the person on the far left. That's Paul Revere on horseback. He's called the messenger of the Revolution. He was willing to go where no one was willing to go. He was a member of the Committee of Safety, always captured by the British. By his first wife, he had 8 children. When she died, he had 8 more by his second. Paul Revere was an individual who everybody went and they would go to one of his wives when they were living. He didn't have 2 at the same time now. But when he was doing it, they said, "Where's your husband?" And they would say, "Probably captured by the British, but he'll be home tonight." Why? Because he was constantly getting out from the British. Not only to the left here, you have Hancock, the financier of the Revolution. Wealthiest man in Boston by age 27. And so he inherited a ton of wealth. I'm so sorry. I'm going to be leaving as quick as I can. But all right, if you just wait 1 minute, I'm out of here, okay? All right? And so, financier. This is the orator of the Revolution, James Otis. He could speak for 3.5 hours. He'd never move a muscle. He was animated. He could quote from 15 to 20 sources by memory. James Otis. And over here you have Samuel Adams, the writer of the Revolution, the penman of the Revolution. And the far right you have the Boston Tea Party, constitutional boycott of illegitimate tax goods. That's how they understood it. They voted, the city voted 7-0 by the town selectmen not to land the tea. This was a legal boycott. This was not a riot. It was so quiet, people could hear the chests being opened 5 miles up the coast. You were fined if you took 1 bag of tea. And they collected 5 bags of tea in people's shoes who tried to do that, and they, to the fullest extent of the law, because they wanted to make sure this was a revolution on principle, not on passion. So it's constitutional. I'm sure you learned all that as a constitutional boycott. It was totally legitimate. Let's go to one side. When we go up 1 floor, we'll probably have to go to the elevators because they're blocking that staircase and we're not going to disturb them. So we'll just go up as quickly as we can. I'll meet you up, try to get into house chamber at least. I know I'm going to have to project a little bit, so it's better you're over here. Now in here we have 4 murals. And those 4 murals give you the 4 cornerstones of Massachusetts. The first, on this end, is the Pilgrims. They're having a church service on board the Mayflower. They are praying. The open Bible at the top is quoting Psalm 89:14. The Lord is our King. And then on the opposite side are the Puritans. The preacher is John Eliot, the man who learned the Algonquin and native tongue and preached the gospel in the language of the natives and ended up starting 14 praying Indian villages because of the massive revival that took place here. And it was the kingdom of God. He not only that, but by 1670, he had translated the entire Bible into the native language. No computers, no internet, and he had translated the entire Bible in order to be able to give that to the native people. So you have the Puritans on this side. Then on this side above us, you have the Patriots, Concord Bridge, at the Old North Bridge in Concord, and Colonel Barrett, who's in his 60s. I feel very good about Colonel Barrett's age, and so I'm in my 60s now, in my mid-60s, and that's when a lot of the leaders led in the American Revolution. They were just getting started. Some people call me old. I said, no, I haven't even started yet. I got great examples. And so they realized, hey, this is amazing because they have the Patriots who stood for liberty. And on the far end, you have Governor Andrew receiving all the flags back during the Civil War. And this was the preservation of the Union. So you have 4 P's: Pilgrims, Puritans, seal. If you look straight up in that room, you will see a sword on the top of the seal. That's the defense of liberty at the American Revolution. You will see a star, meaning we were one of the key colonies that wanted union at the Civil War. You will see all the aspects of that were in there, one of the original colonies. Of course, the seal came before the Civil War did. But the idea is you have those symbolism there, and by the sword we will defend liberty. And so you have all of these ideas. You have the Pilgrim's Prayer, you have the Puritans in the Bible, standing for liberty, and the preservation of the Union. Now the individual who typifies this as a governor is our good friend Jonathan Belcher, right over here, right behind me. Jonathan Belcher was governor during the time of the Great Awakening, from 1730 to 1741. So Jonathan Belcher was called the revival governor. I'll just tell you, he grew up playing with Ben Franklin in the backyard. Jonathan Belcher was great friends. Excuse me here, folks. Just we had, and then when Jonathan Belcher was governor, just imagine this: one of his best friends, Jonathan Edwards. Another best friend, George Whitefield. In fact, when George Whitefield came to preach, he would come in, and a lot of the churches did not want him for two reasons. One, he was not the typical preacher. He didn't stay behind the pulpit. He had an inflection in his voice, used his hands, didn't always read his notes. It was a little bit different. He was a little wild. And they were a little nervous. But the real reason they didn't want him in the churches, so many people packed in that balconies were falling on people. The church was not able physically to handle the numbers. So at the behest of John Wesley, who was Whitefield's friend and tutor back in England, Wesley said, hey, just go into the fields. That's the best place to go. And so he would preach in the fields. Well, this is a true story now. He came to Massachusetts and Harvard University, they didn't want Whitefield, and some of the others didn't. So here's what Governor Belcher did. He said, I got a great plan. He says, I want you to come and get in my governor's coach. And I will go and let the crier tell you in the town green that the governor is here. The governor is here, would like to speak to the citizens. And they all come to the town green. Come on, the governor's there. He's got his coach, and Whitefield's hidden under a blanket. Right? And so here's Governor Belcher, and he simply says this, hear ye, I would like you to all understand several things. And the thing I'd like you to understand is that I want you to listen to my good friend. And up it comes, and Whitefield comes out and preaches. One of those meetings at Harvard, a young 18-year-old Samuel Adams was standing in the crowd. He dedicated his life to Christ, kneeling down at the preaching of George Whitefield. And he became the father of the American Revolution. Same thing happened in the South, by the way, when Samuel Davies preached at an old Presbyterian church in the South. Seated next to his mother was an 18-year-old patriot who was not really committed to anything. After Samuel Davies had finished preaching, this patriot said this, I'm going to commit my life to Jesus Christ completely and wholly. And not only that, Mom, I'm going to pray this, that God would give me a tongue like a flame of fire, like that man. His name, Patrick Henry. And you recognize that when we go on and on through the framers, it's the Great Awakening where they dedicate their lives to Christ. It's the Great Awakening, and it's governors like this who, when they got the combined legislature together, they would preach. And they would preach a sermon to the legislature and say, not on my watch will I ever affirm any law that promotes any wickedness in this colony. So don't even send it my way. Because if you uphold the law drives people to who? Jesus Christ. Lord. And you can see that's the way they were hungry to do this. Now here's what we're going to try to do. I want to finish my story upstairs in a house chamber. The only way to get there is to go through here with a mural that is depicting the honor of the French to the first set of troops from the United States of America that are ever honored by the world. This is World War I, 1918, Apremont, France. Let me just tell you the story very quickly. During this time when the Massachusetts regiment was sent over to France to fight in World War I, they had joined with the French and fighting against the Germans. And when they were fighting against the Germans, you have to understand, European warfare was very different than America. This is the first time, World War I, that American troops were seen on the foreign field. This is the first time ever that happened. We were so used to it, we didn't understand how unique it was. See, in the United States of America, we believe that you have passion for the cause based on ideas that come inside your heart. So we fight from the inside out. In other words, military commanders would say that they design it so that if someone picks off the military commander, the next person steps right up and takes in and leads and continues on. So you know you can't kill an ideological cause. Yes. Follow me? Because the cause doesn't come from the top down. You didn't borrow it from me. You have it in your heart. All I do is inspire you from what's already on the inside. And therefore a speech like you're like, yeah, let's go. And see, because it's from the inside. It's a passion on the inside. Do you understand what I'm saying? In Europe, completely different. You fight because you have to. Sometimes you're paid to fight. You actually hire mercenaries to fight for you. It's from the top down. So everybody knows if you're fighting some kind of regiment that's ruled from the top down, who do you try to pick off? The top guy. Because that's exactly what happened at the Battle of Bunker Hill. The reason why they said wait for the, so you see the whites of their eyes, is so you could pick off the commander. Because once they picked off the commander, the others started to flee. They started to run. And now you may not know this, but I just have to, now that I'm on Bunker Hill for just a second. On that battle, the amazing thing is the one who got all the accolades for that battle was an African American soldier. And you weren't told that in school. I almost guarantee it. And the African American soldier is pictured in Trumbull's painting of the Battle of Bunker Hill. And he is the one that picked off Major Abercrombie that caused us to be able to retreat. If he hadn't picked off the commander, do you know we were trapped? Could never have gotten off Bunker Hill. Because it wasn't Bunker Hill, it was Breeds Hill, but you know what I mean. It was named that because of the original plan. We couldn't have retreated if it wasn't for the African American soldier who got all of the accolades from General George Washington. Why aren't we told these things? I was able to speak to a group of African Americans and say, you've been robbed from your own history. Because this is powerful. And you deal with it. Well, here's the point. The point of that is that the two are so totally different. So here's the French commander, and he sees the American forces come from Massachusetts. And he couldn't believe it. He said, my gosh, the Germans start to outflank, and the Americans, without any command, I heard nobody shouting, they cut them off at the flank. And then when someone died, the next person jumped right in. He said, I've never seen, and this is what he said, when he did this, he said the following. He said, I am proud to decorate the flag of a regiment which has shown such fortitude and courage. Now, I've read the original newspaper article in 1918, which is in the archives, and you read that through, and it's because he knew, you Americans, you fight from the inside out. This is totally amazing. You saved our necks. Why, you saved this entire battalion because of the way you fought. First time in American history. You have the French, you have Joan of Arc, the symbol of France. You have them decorating now the American regiment from Massachusetts with Lady Liberty on the other side. And of course the eagle is the symbol of the providence of God, the symbol of America's seal. And you have this taking place. And Pasaga was the man. And because he was so moved, he said the following, I am going to commission an artistic sculpture to be sent to the state of Massachusetts that will depict how the boys from Massachusetts fought. And what was it? David and Goliath. That statue you saw down there is the Pasaga trophy. Why? Because right makes might. It's not might makes right. Do you follow me? Yeah. One's European in origin, and the other is truly American, but it's Christian. It's not American in that sense. We didn't invent it. It's not because we're great. It's where we got it from. Therefore, this is very meaningful. When I first researched this mural, I was absolutely amazed to find out that there was a Pasaga trophy. I'm in the archives, and I'm talking to the archivist, and I'm saying, where is this thing? It's not in the hallway. I understand why. People would bump in it. They would knock it over. I said, but where is it? She goes, nobody's asked that. I don't know. So we go to this long thing. Of course, it's like, that's back before cell phones. So I'm calling my wife up and I'm just saying, you know, honey, I'm on a hunt. Okay, I understand. I don't know when I'll see you. I said, because I'm not leaving this place. Even they're gonna have to drag me out of this place until I find that Pasaga trophy. And there I go. We were looking in the archives. She almost opened up the vault for me to go in. I said, sure, open up the vault. Give me that, you know, that's great. But now we're going on and on. She goes, well, you know what? The only last thing to do, go down to the tour desk. Maybe one of the tour guides has heard about it. I said, great idea. So I go down there. I'm talking to the man behind the counter who's telling me no such Bible story would ever be enshrined in the State House. And then I look over his shoulder and I see it. Right behind there. So I figured I'd have a little fun. I said, are you sure there's no trophy of David and Goliath? It's called Pasaga Trophy. And he goes, "Oh no, I've never heard of that." I said, "I'm reading the label right now, and it's the Saga Trophy." He turns around. I mean, he couldn't believe it. He said, "Oh my gosh!" And so the idea is, but isn't that the way our nation is right now?
That's right.
We don't even know what's right in front of us.
Yes.
We don't stop. We walk right by it. I was doing a tour down the other hallway outside the executive wing, and an individual walked by me. He was listening to me because I was talking about the prayer mural. And he stopped and he said, "I don't know who you are, man, but there's no prayer mural in the State House. There's no prayer mural. Are you kidding me? This is a secular building. There's no prayer mural in the State House." Now I'm standing right in front of it. I have a tour of 50 people who think I've set this up. They really have. They think I got someone to walk out. You know what I mean? I'm a dramatic guy. You know, they think I just did this. But no, this person is saying, "There's no way. I've been in the State House 25 years. I've walked this hallway for 25 years." And I said, "Yes." And I said, the engraving underneath it says, "Through the cross to victory." Well, that's a symbolism of Christ and Christianity, through the cross of Christ. And he's going, and then I moved aside. And I said, and that's why all these ladies and grandmothers have open Bibles, they're kneeling, and they're in prayer for all their sons who are off in war. And I don't blame him. He's just looking at that, but that's not him. I don't blame him. I'm just saying that's the way it is in our nation. That's why we need to uncover that. And of course, we know there's others that say, "Oh, that's there now. I want to get rid of it." You know what I mean? But the point is, we realize that's the kind of thing. Now, if you went to the State House, in the House chamber and the Senate chamber is under renovation. But in the House chamber, there are 5 huge murals. And I just want to finish the story on why we voted down that first Constitution. And then I don't want to get in trouble with the representative. Okay, so with this, I want to tell you, the preamble, a preamble to a Constitution is usually written last. You know that. You read it first, but it's written last, and the reason it's written last, it summarizes the principles upon which the Constitution rests. So our preamble to the United States Constitution, we, the people, in order to form a more perfect union, etc., establish justice, all those, every one of those phrases illustrates a principle that's embedded in the text of the Constitution. It's a summary. So the preamble of the state constitution is a summary of the second one that was approved. First one I already told you about, natural rights. Then it talks about this, that we have a right to alter the government to take measures for our safety and prosperity. Oh, well, that sounds familiar. That comes from the Declaration of Independence. And not only that, they had a committee to write this constitution. James Bowdoin, Sam Adams, and John Adams. And they elected John Adams to write, because he was very good with writing, just like they elected Thomas Jefferson to write the Declaration. And they said that we're built on covenant, and then they said we're built on a due process of law, a separation of powers. Remember? Executive, legislative, and judicial. And that none of them should alter any powers of the other. They should stay separate. Anytime you have any 2 branches functioning in the same power, that's the definition of tyranny. You can read it in history, it's very clear. So why was the first defeated? The first was defeated because the first one was written by the general court to protect its power from the people. Now, this is what Theophilus Parsons said. We had the most radical patriots in Massachusetts back then. We're out in Pittsfield, the Berkshires. Thomas Allen, he's the preacher who went up and fought at Battle of Ticonderoga. The preachers would just take off the robes after Sunday to pick up the sword and their pistol. They would wear the pistol in the pulpit, too. It was a colonial law that you were never supposed to go into church unarmed. Anyway, just saying, there's no relevance to anything today. But the point is, it was a colonial law. So you had a loaded shotgun leaning it wide because you could be attacked any time. It wasn't for any other reason. And the men would sit on the outside, the women and children on the inside of the pew, and they would have their loaded revolver there. You look it up. Check me out. I'm not making this up. But the point is this. Now you have this. So here's what they say. Theophilus Parsons says this. Look, we're never going to vote for a government when the government writes the Constitution for the government. There'll be no checks and balances at all. No, we will only take a government that is properly structured. Now, why did they vote it down 6-1? Because all the pastors got together and they rode from town to town across Massachusetts and they preached in the pulpits why you should vote that Constitution down.
That's right.
Wow.
Wow.
Imagine a pastor preaching from the pulpit on a relevant current issue. Isn't that a shock? Okay?
Not going to happen today. Huh?
Just tires me up. But I'd say, no, and here's what they did. They preached that, and because of it, listen, 10% of the delegates, the people elected to the Constitutional Convention, were their pastors. They're the ones that had taught them the principles.
Yes.
So the pastors say, vote this one down. And here's why they said it. Vote it down. It does not look like the Hebrew Republic. What's that mean? It's the government that God established in Israel before they chose a king. And what was that government? Everybody had unalienable rights as an individual. Second, you had the three branches of government, the legislative, the judicial, and they were all clearly identified in the scriptures. And not only that, you had a situation where the rule of law, it was the rule of law, not the rule of representatives. It's the rule of law. The representatives are supposed to obey the rule of law. That's right. So you have all of these things that was supposed to be in the Constitution. And the pastor said, the only Constitution we should vote for is when the people ratify the Constitution. Then it's done by consent of the governed. The people ratify it. It has separation of powers. It's clearly unalienable rights. And we clearly are the ones that hold the power and the stewardship of the government. So therefore, they vote the first one down. So who do they vote to write the second one? James Bowdoin, Sam Adams, and John Adams. They're leaders. Where did they get their ideas? They all went to the same church, along with Joseph Warren. Samuel Cooper was the pastor. He was the parson preacher of Boston, Brattle Street Church. He was the #1 pastor written in the logs of the British ships to arrest and to take back to England.
Yeah.
He was the most dangerous person in Boston. Now I ask my students, of course my students, if they get this wrong, they're really in trouble. But I ask people, I give them a quiz. I said, who did the British think was the most dangerous individual in the colonies? Why did they send so many ships over? And they'll all get it, oh, because the Minutemen had guns. Well, everybody had guns. That was the issue. It was the preacher. That's why they call them the Black Robe Regiment.
Yep.
Yes.
Because they were the ones teaching, and Samuel Cooper was the one teaching these principles. So what is it a shock that when they rewrite the Constitution, you can read the preamble. It says God is the great legislator of the universe. God is the great legislator. Why do they call it? I get people all the time. They said, see, they didn't know who God was. They called him a legislator. God's a legislator. He's the chief legislator. So they meant this, that the legislature that sits owes its allegiance to the chief legislator. See?
Yes.
And then they read that everyone has unalienable rights. You can read it right through the Constitution. Every aspect of it. And so the next one easily passes, that Constitution, and in order to make sure the people will vote for it, you know what they do? They take one of Samuel Cooper's sermons and they print it, 28 pages, and they stick it on the Constitution, and when they send the Constitution out, they send a pastor's sermon with it.
Yes.
And you know what Samuel Cooper did? He preached right through why the Hebrew Republic of the Old Testament is the best model for government.
Yes. Amen.
And that was put with the state constitution. You haven't heard that in school? That the reason the state constitution was passed in Massachusetts was because a preacher endorsed it and told them that it was a biblical model. That's awesome stuff, man. This is good stuff. I might even get excited one day about this. Okay? But the point is, here we are dealing with it, and another mural in there shows ratification of the federal constitution by the state of Massachusetts. You know the state of Massachusetts was anti-federalist.
Yes.
They weren't going to vote for the Constitution, the federal Constitution. First reason, no Bill of Rights. Other reasons didn't seem so clear in the preamble, no mention of God. So you got to be careful with this. And two of the people who are against it, John Hancock and Sam Adams, nobody's going to vote. Not many people are going to vote against them. So what do? In the middle of the ratification debates, 1788, for the federal Constitution, another preacher stands up, one of the delegates, Samuel Stillman. He takes the Bible in one hand and the Constitution in the other. And he says this Bible can never be amended.
Yes, amen.
It's the holy word of God. This can be amended. And you will never have a perfect Constitution. Excuse me. I'm sorry. You'll never have a perfect Constitution. Right? It's always going to be errors in it. So therefore, in order to keep it you have to make sure you teach your children and your grandchildren
Yes,
these
amen.
principles, because if you do not raise up godly seed after you, they will not know the principles by which this Constitution rests, and it will change. He preaches the sermon, and on the spot, Hancock and Adams, who had traveled to hear this guy preach anyway, said, he's right. They switched their votes, and we voted it in. Now, when's the last time you heard in a history text the state of Massachusetts voted for the federal Constitution because of a sermon?
No, never.
And it was done in a church, too.
And it wasn't in church.
The convention was held in the church.
Yes,
Yeah.
the convention was held in the Old South, but the idea is, here you have, and right after a sermon, it's voted on. So you have to see that in this area, we could go from room to room, mural to mural, and you'd hear a similar theme. Now I'll close with this. Starting in 1694, the state of Massachusetts started to make regular what had been sporadic, and that is, the legislature would call for days of fasting and prayer, usually in the spring. Then you'd have a day of Thanksgiving in the fall. Now, I'm coming from Pilgrim country. I'm in Plymouth. I usually dress like a pilgrim. I walk the streets of Plymouth. I'm a pilgrim. When I'm in Boston, I got a Joseph Warren costume. If ever I get frustrated, I tell my wife, I'm getting in my suit and I'm going to Boston. Because then I can become Joseph Warren and just preach like he preached for a while. But the point is, when you do that kind of thing, so I'm from Plymouth, so I know this, but I tell you, you recognize when the Pilgrims came here and others came here, they had those seeds of liberty. And you recognize that the prayer and fast days, they became sporadic. The harvest festival we call Thanksgiving today was patterned after the Feast of Tabernacles. William Bradford used the Jewish calendar to mark off their years from Passover to the fall. Well, you have this pattern in America that takes place. So by 1694, it's now every single year the legislature meets and they call the whole people of the state to prayer and fast at the end of March. And then in October, they call a day of Thanksgiving to thank God for the answered prayer in March.
Yes.
It was like clockwork until 1894. In 1894, there was a movement among the people in Massachusetts to totally separate church and state. There's always a jurisdictional separation of church and state, but now an ideological one. And they said to the legislature, you have no right calling days of fasting and prayer, you're secular. You know who led this? Preachers.
Oh,
And you know what happened? In 1894, the state legislature wrote a rebuke to the pastors. Say, hey guys, we're still going to call this, but you don't want it a day of fasting and prayer. You should still we're going to now call it Patriots' Day. That's the origin of Patriots' Day.
wow.
But Patriots' Day, if you have the true origin, you've got Jonas Clark with his Bible standing on the road while his congregation stands on the green. It's pretty Christian, okay? Jonas Clark wrote all the state papers for Lexington. So he was a very articulate preacher. Well, you have this idea now, they're here, and he said, look, you should do it with religious observations. Patriots' Day is supposed to be a religious holiday where you celebrate liberty coming from the source of Christianity. And so here we have prayer and fasting that is ended. Now here's my supposition. Having studied history for 4 decades now and taught it in classroom, world history, American history, European history, histories of the world, I would submit this to you. It's just about every significant event in American history was led by Christians, positive or negative. Our whole foreign policy was changed by a Christian who was president of the United States, who stayed up all night long praying and made the wrong decision in the morning out of an undue influence for money. Changed our whole, from John Quincy Adams' pattern of foreign policy to one of interventionism. And that's toward the end of the martyr president, McKinley. So you can go through this and realize this. So here's the idea. I closed with this with an oration I gave down south a while ago, and I'll just say it here. If God gives a gift of liberty to a people, the only way we lose it is we give it away.
Exactly.
It's not stolen. It's been given away. Our problem is not the humanist. Our problem is not the people who don't believe in Christ. Our problem is not the people who you want to point out. Someone came to me and said, well, what's the biggest sin that's in America? And I know what they wanted me to say. They wanted me to say abortion. They wanted me to say this one, that one. I said the biggest problem we have today is pride on one hand and complete apathy and ignorance on the other. That's our biggest problem. So here's the idea. You know it. You share it now. Don't give it away. Hold it, steward it, teach your children, teach your grandchildren, and one day, like has happened before, we'll have another encounter with God, a revival, and an awakening that will awaken people to the true sources of liberty. God bless
Amen.
you.
Amen.
Okay. So, you guys go downstairs, and please tell Representative Lyons I was
Plymouth
as
Rock
obedient as
Foundation.
I possibly could.